Melbourne, welcome. I'm Stan Grant, here to give you some answers. Disability rights campaigner Elly Desmarchelier, Shadow Assistant Treasurer and former NDIS Minister Stuart Robert, Minister for the NDIS and Government Services Bill Shorten, Greens spokesperson on health and disability rights and services Jordon Steele-John, and Chief Economist at PwC Australia Amy Auster. Please make them welcome.
My question is for panellist Stuart Robert. Were you paid directly or indirectly for your assistance to lobbying firm Synergy 360? If not, why did you do it?
Well, surprise, surprise, Stan. Every time I turn up, there's always a gotcha moment. Let's start with the facts, because we had a good outing on this in question time today. So the papers reported that 6 years ago, while I was on the backbench, that I, as I do normally and all politicians do, engage with meeting with stakeholders. I'm not paid for it. I don't get anything for it. I assist people. I wasn't responsible for anything. And I continue to meet with stakeholders as all MPs do. Now, newspapers have got emails that showed that I provided advice and guidance, as I do all the time, for stakeholders and constituents alike.
You're being a bit disingenuous, aren't you?
I don't think so, Stan.
They're not stakeholders. They are personal friends, people you'd have business association with, and the emails reveal that you had not just had connection with them, association with them, but you'd also recommended them to clients and given references for them. That's more than what you just said then.
Oh, if people ask for advice as who's good or bad or otherwise, I'll absolutely give an opinion. The emails also show when they asked should they donate to the Liberal Party, I said no. So it's very clear what the boundaries are, very clear what the lines are. I'll continue to engage with stakeholders as Bill does.
But let's be clear, you are talking about people who were friends of yours, not just constituents and stakeholders.
I'll continue to engage with everyone, whether they're friends of mine or otherwise, Stan.
And to go to the question as well, did you receive any financial gain, either directly or indirectly?
Goodness, no, not at all. And I made that very clear.
Directly or indirectly?
Directly or indirectly, none. None at all. Remember, I was a backbencher. Wasn't a minister, had no responsibility, no authorities, no procurement, nothing at all, simply a backbencher.
Bill Shorten.
Well, I know we're mainly here to talk about the NDIS, but I think that in the light of the member for Fadden's answer, I have with me some emails, and he's saying that this is just standard practice. But he writes to his friend, who's Mr. David Milo, who's the CEO of Synergy 360 Consulting. David writes to him first on this email and says, should I consider joining the Hume Forum? That's a fundraising vehicle for the Liberal parties. And Stuart says, nope, it'll be declared and it'll hurt you. So he's giving him advice, but he's saying it'll be declared, which is, why would, if it's straight up and above, why not just donate and declare? Why tell him not to declare? There's another message here he writes to his friend from the consulting company in question. David, I was chatting to the Singaporean High Commissioner. They have a $2 billion investment in Shoalwater Bay and Townsville Defence Area. Says at present they rely on local emergency services. My friend, the member for Fadden, says this puts them at the mercy of state health services. There's an opportunity for an Australian firm like Aspen Medical to help them. I guess the point about that is Aspen Medical a client of 360 Synergy? I don't know, but maybe our friend here can answer that.
Nor do I, but I'm all for Australian firms.
Yeah, what about Australian Health Services? Anyway, you're obviously a full-service shop for this consultancy firm.
Not at all. No, that's pejorative, Bill, and you know it.
Well, let's go to this one then. There's a big private Taiwanese company, Formosa, and you write to Formosa and you say, there's a great set of work coming up at the Gold Coast City Council with a citywide lighting replacement. Perhaps, and you write to the consulting company, hey, perhaps you could, he writes to the Formosa and the Taiwanese company, I know a very good consulting company who could help you win some of that work. 360 Synergy.
Today,
you're doing great service for Synergy 360. I just wondered, does everyone else get that same level of service and business spotting?
Except there wasn't a lighting replacement project on the Gold Coast at all.
Well, your emails, I'll put them up online and people can be the judge of that.
Today in Parliament, you used the word corruption. Is that what you believe you were talking about here?
I don't have all the evidence.
You did use that word today in Parliament.
As a general principle...
It's covered by privilege, remember, Stan.
No, well, as a general principle, Australians expect MPs to represent their constituencies, not former private business contacts. And the Fairfax papers, I know it's another media outlet, have raised issues, and what I'm going to do is go to my departments, which were formerly run by the Coalition, and make sure that the contracts allocated to clients of this consulting firm, who Mr Robert certainly spots opportunities for, to make sure it's above board. So I don't know if there's corruption, but I tell you what, we're just going to find out.
Remember, I was on the backbench. I wasn't a minister in Service Australia for years and years later. I categorically deny anything when it comes to procurement, because you know how procurement works, Bill, and ministers have absolutely and utterly no responsibility for it.
Whether you're a minister or a backbencher, shouldn't the same principle apply, that you should not be giving advice necessarily to lobbyist companies that are then profiting, or clients that are profiting from that association?
When people come and seek advice from MPs, which they do all the time, we'll provide it to them. Right, we'll give it to them. We'll provide representation, we'll provide stakeholder management for them, and we'll assist them and provide advice as required.
I don't want to prolong the debate, but all I would ask Mr Robert is, did you advise all consulting companies about the opportunities in Townsville, or the opportunities potentially in Gold Coast lighting? Or that you shouldn't donate to a particular Liberal fund because it'll be declared? Or was it just this company who received the benefit of your advice? And if it was just this company, what made this company so special to any other consulting company?
I'm trying to work out what you're alleging, Bill, in that respect, because I'm on the backbench. It's 6 years ago. I'll provide advice to anyone, and saying to people, hey, don't donate to the Liberal Party, how is that a bad thing?
Jordon, you're in the Parliament. What do you make of all this today?
Well, I'm sitting here, to be honest with you, Stan, as one of the two disabled people on the panel, and hoping we can get to the NDIS soon. You know, if we wanted to listen to this kind of thing, we'd turn on question time. And I would say that exactly this type of situation is exactly why the Greens have spent 12 years campaigning for a national anti-corruption commission, and why it is so important that anti-corruption commission have public hearings. And I am really disappointed that the bill that is being moved through the Parliament at the moment has a clause which says it will only have public hearings in exceptional circumstances, because people like Mr Roberts and others who've engaged in this type of activity, the only thing that stops them is the fear of consequences, the fear of being publicly outed for that behaviour. Okay, and if those public hearings are placed behind, closed doors, then we will continue to see this behaviour.
Well, we've heard from Bill Shorten, we've heard from Stuart Robert, and we'll see where this goes to in the days and weeks ahead.
Hello. The NDIS is fundamentally broken. People aren't getting the support that they need, largely because of the machine learning system and algorithms that are now used to determine our funding. Should the previous government be held accountable for this, and will the new government fix our NDIS?
I want to go to you first, Elly, on this. Is it broken?
I think that at its heart, the NDIS is about people. It's about the 500,000 Australians with disability that it supports every single day to do practical things like have a shower, prepare a meal, go out into the community. And I think on those fundamental foundations, the NDIS is strong. It is delivering the transformational economic and social outcomes it was supposed to. Dan, I'll give you 3 examples from my own life, just to paint an idea of how transformational this scheme has been. In the 3 years before I had the NDIS, I was in the ICU half a dozen times for things as simple as a UTI. In the 3 years since I've gotten the NDIS, I've been in the ICU 0 times. Because I've had access to the allied health I need to stay safe. When I got the NDIS, I was sitting in a wheelchair bought from the special buys section at Aldi. I couldn't push myself, it caused pain, and it meant I couldn't work. Now, I'm sitting in a wheelchair funded by the NDIS that gets me to and from work, Hell, it even gets me up onto the Q&A stage.
Yeah, we're happy to have you here.
And most importantly, I think, before the NDIS, I couldn't envisage a future where I wasn't dependent on my partner and my family, my parents in particular, to live, to shower me, to feed me, to house me. I was looking at a life reliant on other people. And now I look forward to a life of my own choosing, of my own destiny. And so that is just 3 examples from my life. But I hear that kind of transformational change repeated every single day by people with disability. They're frustrated that the scheme isn't working in part. They want the scheme to be better, but they have all experienced some kind of transformation in their life because of this scheme.
Thank you, Elly. And Amy, the issue that we keep hearing about now is cost. And this seems to be something we'll be hearing a lot more about this today. Projections that in 10 years it's going to be $100 billion a year. It's more expensive than aged care. Is that where the issue lies? How is it going to be funded? And what is going to have to be cut if we can't fund it?
I'd like to build on what Elly was saying and return to the purpose of the NDIS, which was an extremely and remains an extremely ambitious reform, and we should be so proud. You hear about, in Australia we've lost the will to reform. I say, forget it. Look at this. It is a world-leading effort to absolutely transform the way disability services are provided in this country. And government had a tough job to do in doing it. There's the funding of it, but the other role for government is really creating the rules of the system, the regulation of the system, of what is basically a market. How is it going to work? And it went from government services provided at the state level, where nobody got a choice, and you got told what you were given, and that's what you had, and that was it, to putting all of that power in the hands of the people whose lives it is, as you were saying.
But clearly, just hearing the question from Samantha, there are frustrations we're going to hear about more, and it does come back to this. As an economist, you look at the numbers and you must say, well, where's that going to come from?
I look at how the market works, which is 2 different things. So have we set it up correctly? What is the regulation like? How do we understand the rules of people who are in the NDIS and people who are on the border of the NDIS as clients? And how do we understand the market for the providers, which have varying degrees of regulation and access to provide those services? That is really important, and it's so hard to build. If you think of it's like a Jenga, where you're trying to take out pieces of something, put them in a different form, actually make a Jenga into a circle. It's a totally different concept. The funding is one part, but I really believe that as this market matures, and I mean all of the institutions that sit around it, the practice of it, as we understand it, and as it continues to improve, the funding part will start to actually kind of sort itself out.
Jordon.
Stan, I think that we've got to kind of acknowledge a bit of an elephant in the room, which is that right now we have a narrative in the Australian community, and that narrative is being pushed by decision makers. It has been pushed by the previous government that the NDIS is costing too much. That was a scare campaign that came from the Morrison government, and unfortunately we've seen too many people in the current government and in the press continue that narrative. It was a decision that was made to frame the NDIS in that way. And I think while we are considering that decision, we should also consider that at the same time, other decisions were also made. The decision was made to give Gina Rinehart and billionaires like Clive Palmer a $9,000 tax cut. The decision was made to direct $40 billion of public funds to fund fossil fuel companies to extract and burn coal, oil and gas in the middle of a climate crisis, and to decide that the gas industry, making record windfall profits, shouldn't pay an additional cent in tax. So if we're having a conversation about the NDIS and someone brings up cost. The Greens' answer is, well, let's make some different decisions. Let's actually cancel the stage 3 tax cuts and put $240 billion into public funds. Let's actually end fossil fuel subsidies and put that into the public purse to be able to fund the NDIS. Let's have a windfall tax on the gas industry, and with that money, we can fund the NDIS and transform people's lives with programs like bringing mental and dental health care into Medicare right now.
To the question, Bill, and Samantha's question went to how are we going to fix this, and Jordan's raised questions about funding. What is the funding answer to this? Because we know in the budget there were questions raised about the long-term projections. We know we're going to have to find this money. So are we going to look at taking something from elsewhere and putting it into NDIS, increasing taxes, cutting services? What are you going to do?
Sam's question, as I recall, was saying that she feels the system's broken. Now, I don't mind Jordon putting his point of view about every other policy. My view, though, about the NDIS is this. On one hand, we've got to stop talking about it just as a cost. It's an investment. At the same time, we have to make sure that the investment's actually working in the interests of people with disability. I know the scheme grew under the previous coalition government, and to that extent, that's a good thing. But also in their time, a lot of problems started to emerge. I think, and Sam Connors, what she doesn't know about the system isn't worth knowing. She's been the leader of people with disability in Australia. What she and I and many other people here have worked on is drawing attention to the fact that whilst there's a lot of good news in the scheme, and whilst it is an investment which is transformational and world-leading, it hasn't been well run. There have been bureaucratic decisions. Too many people have had to go to court to sort out their matters. Too many people have been stuck in hospital when they're medically eligible for discharge, but because the system and the NDI is too slow, they've been stuck there. So it can be reformed. Now, I get...
And you have a review at the moment where you're looking at this. So what specifically are you looking at? When you highlight those issues, you're in the chair now. What are you going to do?
I think I've got the best job in government, which is NDIS, because I think it can work. I think it should work, and I think we will make it work, and we'll do it by co-design with people with disability. So, for example, in the first 6 months, we've changed the senior leadership. We've put Kurt Fernley, for the first time ever, you've got a person with lived experience of disability as chair of the board, which is great. But we've set up a review. It's to report no later than October of next year. There's people with lived experience on the review and in the Secretariat. There's people who've spent their whole lives working in disability. There's economists. We've got some of the smartest people in Australia committed to the future of the scheme, saying, how can we improve its operation? But we're not just waiting for the review, and we're not just changing the leadership and giving more voice to people with disability. One bit of good news which I received this afternoon is that one of the issues which I think has been an ugly issue in the scheme is that people who are eligible for NDIS are stuck in hospital when they're eligible to be discharged, but we can't get their plan sorted. So I've made that a priority. So there were, at the time of the election, there were 1,400 people stuck in hospital eligible for discharge. The average waiting time has been 160 days after they're ready to leave. Now it's down to 39 days. Now, we want to do better than that. Just imagine the difference it makes, not only for the hospitals, but for people with disability, knowing they can be in their permanent accommodation, better accommodation. So I think it's a layered approach to reform, and let's talk about it more.
Hi. Refugee and migrant with disability faces many challenges. One of those challenges is they are wrapped into the wider multicultural communities, despite their diverse needs. I'm a woman with disability who wears hijab. I'm a refugee, an African migrant, and a woman of color. Surely there is a need for a tailored approach to meet the diverse needs to those with intersectional dimensions, such as mine. I would like to know, what are we doing to close the gap refugees and migrants with disabilities experience in accessing NDIS to receive safe and respectful services.
Bill.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, or your statement, really. What's been happening with the NDIS debate is, on one hand, some of the very right-wing commentators say the scheme's too expensive, crisis, the whole place is burning down. But at the same time, there's other people who say that, in fact, you've got to be, if I can speak very straight, white, middle-class, tertiary educated to access the scheme. It's a postcode lottery. I tend to believe the second view, not the first view. So part of our review is to look at how we make sure that the scheme gets to people for whom it's just not, they don't have the same level of advocacy. There's been research done that, depending on your educational attainment, there's a correlation with more affluent suburbs, that your average NDIS package is higher. Now, that isn't acceptable. And so, I did a forum with African community leaders a couple of months ago in Footscray, and they gave me some good ideas on how we can do more outreach. The point about the scheme is it shouldn't matter what your ethnicity is, it shouldn't matter where you live, it's whether or not you have a disability and whether or not the scheme can assist you with core functions.
I think so, Bill, if I could just come in though, I think Anab's saying it does matter. Aren't you, Anab?
It does matter.
No, I'm saying
and at the
that's
same time,
yeah, well, we're agreeing.
And at the same time, refugees and migrants are not just from Africa. They're from
Well, I was
many
using the
continents.
example of the forum I was at, but I think you'll find in the answer I just gave you, I said that there's a two-class scheme. And so if I was unclear, Stan, let me be very clear, that I think that for some people the scheme's been working very well, but for other people, based on a whole set of other factors, they're not able to access the scheme equally. So we will address that. There was just a point earlier said about, where we're going with the scheme. Stuart said that none of us have a rule book on how to run the scheme. I don't need a rule book per se. I mean, there are regulations. What you need to do is have co-design and listen to people with disability. The problem with the scheme, in my opinion, where it's gone wrong for the first speaker and the second person and the third, is that the scheme, the agency became, I think, very introspective. There's a lot of good people who work at the National Disability Insurance Agency, but the leadership became very defensive and they stopped listening to people with disability. One of the reasons why some people give up on the scheme or can't get access is our predecessors put a staff cap. When there were about 170,000 people on the scheme, there was about 3,500 people working at the Disability Agency. But then there was a rule came out of the government said, no more people that'll work at the agency. We're going to have a staff cap. So then we've created, we've reached the people running the scheme, went to not-for-profits and created other structures. What Labor has done since we got elected is we've lifted the staff cap. In other words, why not have enough people in the agency to help all the people who want to navigate the scheme? The other thing we've done too much in the past, or not we, but my predecessors, is they began to rely too much on algorithms and machine statements about what you're eligible for. The reason why it was so important that we changed government when it came to the NDIS back in May is I was worried the scheme was becoming a cookie-cutter welfare scheme, not a scheme which sat down with each individual.
Thanks, Dan. I'm a carer and a mother of 22-year-old Max. Max has severe intellectual disability and autism. Max has enriched my life and many others in my community in countless ways. So tonight I want to ask this question on behalf of Max. Much of the current media coverage on the NDIS seems to me to have a segregating and paternalistic undertone that both pits the taxpayer against the person with a disability who cannot work and equates worth with employability. My question to the panel is this: are we as a society stuck in ideology that devalues and discriminates against people who may never be able to have the privilege to be employed?
Amen.
I hear your emotion in that question. I have 3 kids myself, and I hear you. I hear what you're saying. What I've picked up from the previous conversation is really the great intangible value of the NDIS is it represents inclusion. It represents a truly inclusive economy, a truly inclusive society. That is its vision to me. That is the North Star. And we don't have an organization that works like that yet. So where you have people who are meant to be included, who can't even understand it, there's fault in the design. There's fault in the way that it's run. Not any individual's fault, and I'm not being critical. Like I said, a huge effort to build it. And with anything like that, anytime you're doing something for the first time, you're going to make mistakes and you're going to have things that go wrong. When I read back on the Productivity Commission, I'm an economist, I can't help it, read the Productivity Commission reports that talked about the formation of the NDIS. It talked about the NDIS was formulated as an entitlement, and it was purposeful. And the enthusiasm for that entitlement, I think, was universal in the Australian community for the recognition that it is about dignity, and it is about dignity of every single person. So I say that is the vision, and let's just keep building to it.
Rebecca, can I ask about Max and how the NDIS, we heard from Elly before about what it brought to her life. How has it transformed his life?
Well, there's Max. Max self-harmed for a very long time. When we got an NDIS package and he received support that was right for him, it pretty much eliminated his self-harming. It's been completely transforming. And ironically, with the more support he has, the more individual he's become and the more interested in his community he's become. And he gives back to that community, like I said, in countless ways. Enjoy his present-centeredness. I have many people remarking to me who work with him that they've changed their life and taught them a lot. So, yeah, he's a beautiful, joyous person.
Stan, I have to say, you have the joy and the determination of what I see in so many mums of disabled kids. So, but I want to say to you really clearly, Max is worthy. Whether Max works or not, Max is worthy.
You don't need to tell me that.
Yeah.
I know that.
Everyone else needs to hear that. And a word I picked out of what your opening question was he's segregated.
Yeah.
And that is something that we all need to be very aware of, because what we forget right now is we have a Disability Royal Commission going on right now, looking at violence, exploitation, abuse against people with disability. And most of those things happen in segregated environments. So how, as a community, can we use things like the NDIS to break down segregation? You know, you read the Productivity Commission report. I read Julia Gillard's speech when she introduced the NDIS into the House of Parliament. And she said that it was a case of moral care. As a society, we were showing moral care, and that the NDIS had found a place in Australia's heart, and we weren't going back. And let me just tell you, I'm not going back. I'm not going back to staking out the special buys section. We're not going back. And I actually really wanted to just focus for 1 second on the fact that when the minister was asked, you know, how do you fix the NDIS? He didn't have all the answers, and that's a good thing, because the answers need to come from people with disability. This review needs to be led by people with disability. So thank you for asking that on behalf of Max. Whether you have a job or not does not determine your worth in this community. And I hope the NDIS makes his life more joyful.
In the wider media that gets that message, because every time I hear the taxpayer and the cost, I just think you are missing a big point here, and you are valuing people's life on how much money they earn, and you're missing out. You're missing out.
Just on that point, before we move on, really quickly, Amy, because it is something that is often overlooked. The NDIS is not just a debit column. There is also a benefit column, a plus column. Yeah. And how much does $1 spent on the NDIS also contribute beyond that?
I mean, there is an answer. There have been studies done. I actually hesitate to give the numbers because how do you compare that with dignity? I mean, to me, it's a non-comparison. There are economic multipliers. There are people who are in NDIS.
But it's certainly in the plus, isn't it? In terms
definitely
of what
in the plus. People who get into NDIS and are then able to enter paid work or expand their paid work, and also their carers, so critical. And broader family. So yes, it's a net benefit, there is no question. A net benefit to other forms of care. Childcare has a huge net benefit. Aged care also actually has a net benefit. But the biggest net benefit, I think this is important, is across all cohorts, sectors, actually comes from housing and secure housing. And that is something that I think is often underpinning the stress that that is experienced by people who are living with disability and their families, and everybody and many other people who are in a vulnerable position.
That's all we've got time for. Do thank our panel: Elly, Desmarchelier, Stuart Robert, Phil Shorten, Jordon, Steele-John, and Auster. Live in Sydney next week for the final program of the year. Joining me, best-selling author Grace Tame, Republican Nova Peris, Independent MP Allegra Spender, New South Wales Treasurer Matt Keane, and broadcaster Josh Sepps. Do head to our website to register to be in the audience. Till I see you then. Good night.